we are less than a month away from the 77th World Health Assembly, where the World Health Organization looks to finalize a worldwide pandemic treaty, or accord as they're calling it, that would lead to the surrender of our national sovereignty to a corrupt global bureaucracy. Now, according to the WHO's communications, last week's meeting of the working group on amendments to the international health regulations brought the organization closer to finalizing the agreement at the assembly next month. As we've pointed out many times, the process is fluid and I believe intentionally convoluted. Now, can we stop this global power grab, and if so, how? Joining me now to discuss this and more is Congressman Chris Smith. He is a senior member on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and the chairman of the Subcommittee on Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations. He represents the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey. Congressman Smith, welcome back to the program. It's always great to have you on.
Tony, thank you so very much, and appreciate all that you do in FRC. It's amazing.
Chris, before we go to the WHO, this afternoon news broke that the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, and other Democrats confirmed that Democrats in the House would not go along with a vote to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson that's been put forth by Marjorie Taylor Greene. Your reaction?
Well, I do hope that Marjorie Taylor Greene will be deferred from offering this. I mean, Mike Johnson is an extraordinarily noble man, a good man, very effective, very smart. He's rising to the occasion of being Speaker. I don't think it was in his plans to do this anytime soon. And he did step up, and he's doing an extraordinary job under unbelievably hard circumstances. So, I think it's, I'm glad that the Democrats will not vote to throw him out of that position. I hope no Republicans do either. So maybe she'll defer it and not do it, or just give up that, which I think is a very, very bad path for her to follow.
So hopefully this could soon be in the rear view mirror and we could move on.
I hope so. I hope so. There's just so many pressing issues. We need to be unified as a party. We do have a good unity among the issues, particularly the moral issues, and I think that gets swiped by these kinds of shenanigans.
Right.
I don't think it's helpful. It's not healthy.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. I hope they move on from this. All right, 2 days ago, WHO Secretary General Tedros Ghebreyesus was at the World Economic Forum, and he had this to say.
We're unprepared, and we're still vulnerable to the same problem. But the good news is, based on the lessons learned, we're building something. But we need to have a binding agreement in order to prevent or to early detect and respond in a better way.
Chris Smith, they're still scaring people, trying to grab more power.
That's exactly what they're doing. Tedros used the key word here, too. It's binding. It's as if this is an act of Congress. Treaty obligations are equivalent to any law. And the amount of money that will be required of the American taxpayer will be extraordinary vis-a-vis everyone else. You'll just look at the way we deal with the United Nations. We gave them $18 billion in 2022 under Biden. We were assessed $3 billion. We gave them $15 billion with a B on what they call voluntary contributions. $800 million of that went to the World Health Organization, over and above our $122 million assessment. I mean, the taxpayer should not be fleeced like this. And again, we'll be told, according to the treaty itself, sometime in 2026, what our obligation will be in terms of financial. It is an affront to our sovereignty, where unelected bureaucrats will be dictating policy when it comes to vaccinations, therapeutics, and the like. And again, we're talking binding. There's even an article in here, it's called Article 18, about combating false, misleading, and disinformation. Who did more false and misleading and disinformation than the World Health Organization itself when it came to COVID-19? They did exactly what Xi Jinping, the Chinese dictator who put Tedros into that job, they did exactly what he wanted him to say. That is, the Communist Party, dictated to him. This is a very, very dangerous loss of our sovereignty if it were to become a treaty to which we accede to.
Now, Chris, there's kind of two elements of this moving on parallel tracks. So there's the treaty, or what they call the accord. There's amendments to the current protocol that's in place. This has been a multi-year process. Is it accurate, as I described it, being a convoluted process that's hard to track, and that's intentional?
Oh, I think it's very intentional. It's a very closed process where like-minded people who are just going along, some of them, and others are being dictated to by the bureaucrats at WHO. They get text, they negotiate it, whatever that is. They get prescribed, this is what we want in there. And the draft treaty, as it has gone through iterations, the essential elements stay the same. For example, it calls for the continuation of essential health services. WHO, World Health Organization, defines essential health services to be abortion on demand. And there's no other organization on the face of the earth pushing harder to get every country in the world to allow unfettered access to abortion right up into the moment of birth, without any kind of conscience protections for doctors or healthcare professionals. I mean, it's an all-out going for the jugular, and now this treaty, if it were to become in force, will require that abortion be a part of it. Where does abortion, which is a weapon of mass destruction, where does that come in as something that has to do with pandemics?
Right.
It's very, very troubling that they would look for every opportunity to integrate the abortion issue, and this is just another example of that.
Congressman Smith, you mentioned the pandemic accord. They've got abortion in there, but it appears from my reading of this that they can define a crisis, a healthcare crisis, a crisis of any kind. It's not just pandemics like we looked at COVID. It could be any number of things that they declare a global crisis on that would kick in the provisions.
Exactly, Tony. A health crisis. They could be declaring, and again, they talk about there will be consultations with the countries in question. Good luck with that when bureaucrats, with the force of international law, are telling countries you must do this and you must do that. That's why it's such an invasion of sovereignty. Now, we think, and I think naively, that we can then push back on this. Look out for the lawsuits and everything else that will occur. And unfortunately, when you look at our own CDC, our own National Institutes of Health, and others, they are all in with this groupthink about these health crises, and that we're willing to, provide Tedros and his bureaucrats such authority. I think the authority on health should be local. There are times when it needs to be federal, but it needs to be local. And you don't want this being usurped, that authority, by a global diplomat, so-called, who has no accountability whatsoever. There's none. They tell us what to do, and we say yes, sir. Not in my time.
So, Congressman Smith, is the Biden administration basically keeping this under wraps until they've committed the United States to this binding agreement?
Well, you don't see many press conferences or press statements. Unfortunately, at press conferences, you don't hear, the White House being asked about it. I wish they would be, with very specific questions, not some overall glib, yes, we all want to have a safer world. Well, of course we do. But Tedros has proven, and the World Health Organization has proven, especially with COVID, that they're not trustworthy. And that is very serious. That you can't, when they're prescribing a certain course of action, for instance, they may say that all the 2-year-olds need to get a vaccination. When there's a lot of contrary data that says, they're not getting COVID, looking in the rearview mirror. Do not vaccinate those kids. You don't know what complications that might have. Same goes for other young people, older than the 2-year-olds. And many other countries, including in Europe, began to push back on these so-called recommendations, which are really, dictates to over-vaccinate, and again, with all these deleterious effects occurring to a large number of people. And then this whole idea of disinformation, I find that so every time some of the doctors and very, very thoughtful doctors would speak out, epidemiologists and others, they were completely brushed to aside. They were demonized. by the press, the mainstream media, that is, and by so-called health officials in this country.
You even
like
had
Fauci,
you
like
even
Fauci.
had the White House pressuring social media to take off these individuals.
Exactly.
In fact, we were flagged. In fact, this program, what we're talking about right now, if this treaty were in effect, could be flagged for misinformation. So this is a serious threat.
Very
what we
serious.
saw during COVID, I mean, this is essentially COVID on steroids when you look at the WHO. And folks, I'm going to have some action items here for you in just a moment, but you can text WHO to 67742. That's WHO to 67742. Congressman Chris Smith, you've been around, 4 decades working internationally. You know foreign policy issues. You know the United Nations. You know the World Health Organization. When you look at, with that frame of reference, when you look at this treaty that's being advanced, how serious of a threat is this on a scale of 1 to 10 and what you've seen in the past?
I would say 10. This is the kind of conveyance of the authority that should be left in the hands of us, elected officials, health professionals in the United States, with a robust debate as to what course of action should be pursued, and not handing it over to people who just will look at us and say, you do as I say. It's a matter of treaty. You are bound by this. It's a matter of law. And so I think this is a very, very serious next step towards having authority, almost a dictatorship of
I mean, this is kind of
by a certain group.
It's kind of like a one world government. I mean, this is setting the stage for that. All right,
Sure it is.
Chris Smith,
yeah.
How do we stop it? We just got a few weeks before they meet in Geneva, Switzerland. What are the action steps here?
Well, I've gone to Geneva myself. I've lobbied with delegations and tried to point out the pitfalls. For some in the developing world, they see this as a means to getting additional funding. And if the American public wants to provide funding, and we are very generous, whether it be Ebola or COVID, then that should be a decision made by us and not by the WHO. Like I said, all of this kicks in terms of what our assessments are in 2026, after it's all signed, sealed, and delivered. I'm deeply concerned that the administration will use the very tricky and deceitful mechanism called an executive agreement, as opposed to submitting it for ratification but to the United States Senate, where a supermajority would have to vote for it if it is to come into force in the United States. It was used by the Obama administration on the nuclear deal with Iran, which is why, frankly, President Trump was able to come in and say that very flawed, egregiously flawed agreement with the mullahs in Tehran is not going to be enforced anymore because they never submitted it for ratification. But I'm very worried about him bypassing, the advice and consent by the United States Senate in terms of a ratification vote. If it's so good, submit it for ratification. And there is a bill, H.R. 1425. Many of us have co-sponsored it that would say, it does not come into force unless, and we want no part of this, unless it is submitted to ratification. And even there, it could be a big fight.
Right.
But we would welcome that because there's been no scrutiny of any kind of, no focus, no scrutiny brought to bear on this. It's like groupthink, monolithic groupthink. Everybody just go along the way they did with Fauci for so long.
All right, Chris Smith, we've got that bill. Tom Tiffany, the author of that bill, you're a key co-sponsor of that, H.R. 1425, is that?
25, yes.
All right, folks, we'll have that up on the website, as well as you can make comments during the comment period that ends this week with the Department of Health here in the United States. Simply text WHO to 67742. Chris Smith, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.